Okay, we're just going to do a quick review, similar to the one we did before. I do want to note that if you guys look on the YouTube links, I'm going to include the eStim and neuromuscular eStim and the general intro to eStim PowerPoints that I did from last semester as well, and those will give you a more in-depth sort of perspective of what going a little more into the material. So just another level of trying to help you guys understand what we're learning for the Easton, because I know some of the concepts can be a little bit almost like suffocatingly physiological and anatomical, but you'll get through it. So lots and lots and lots of material here. This PowerPoint, this review is going to be, again, just like the one we did before, where we're just focusing in on prepping you guys for the quiz. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. These are the reviews. Again, just know the difference between monopolar, bipolar, and then quadrupolar technique setups, right? Um, Neuromuscular. So, what are the proposed benefits? This is always something we talk about for every modality. The big thing with NMES is typically it's going to induce some kind of contraction. So, it's going to be contraction oriented benefits. So, through contraction, we can increase strength, we can improve muscle endurance, we can start to re educate the muscle, and we can improve general function. We can also work to decrease spasm and spasticity, and as well, we can start to try and address edema control issues through muscular pumping. Um, Also increasing, for instance, range of motion, but that's only going to do with active range of motion, right? It's not going to have an effect on passive range of motion. All right, so going back again, what is the definition of alternating current? What is Russian current, also called symmetrical biphasic, which means it goes negative and positive in equal parts? Russian is the most common used NMES waveform. Again, it's sort of specifically tailored to muscular contraction. So just understanding that you have a carrier, there's a frequency of 2,500 hertz, broken up into 10 millisecond bursts of 10 milliseconds on time, 10 milliseconds off time, and delivered at 50 beats per second, right, over the course of 1 second. So you get these bursts per second, I should say, rather than necessarily like beats. So your beats are actually bursts with Russian. And here's that sort of what they call polyphase, excuse me, where it's a combination of positive, negative, and then a rest interburst interval, lots of intervals and interbursts and bursts with Russian. So that's something to think about. This is a biphasic waveform. Just know the definition of this, right? So here is my phase duration right here. So each phase of the pulse has a duration, and then the amount of pulses in a given time are going to be your pulse rate. Knowing the electrode placements, right? How you're going to use motor points on the muscle belly to be able to direct where to put your stimulators. The electrode size, how that changes, the contact with the body, and the body composition, right? Knowing that there's different body compositions with different tissues, and electrical impulses can be impeded or enhanced depending on what the tissue is. So here's an example again of separating for penetration depth. So the farther apart the electrodes are, the deeper, the more deeply penetrating the electrical current is going to go as opposed to being close together. Important to know, obviously, that electrodes should be separated by at least one diameter. We talked about this in lab and lecture, understanding that there's higher densities in smaller pads and greater densities or lesser current densities in larger pads. We discussed that last time. Here's an example of a functional electrical stimulator as in terms of a device. Here we can see that the functional stimulator is stimulating the anterior tib as this patient moves through swing through to be able to um, prevent or help to alleviate the effects of foot drop because of a neurological condition. So foot drop is associated with a dorsiflexor weakness or some kind of lacking in terms of the innervation of the dorsiflexor. So with this, we have a stimulator to do the job for the dorsiflexor in this case. So that would be a functional stimulator because the patient can wear this while they're moving around. You can see this here, right? Also has some stimulators attached to like something like this recumbent bike so that we can fire agonists and antagonists that allow the patient to be able to participate in something like cycling. Electrical stimulation for stroke, we discussed a little bit this, not interested in this for the quiz. We can use electrical stimulation for spinal cord injuries. I would know for both of these just the primary reasons why we do this and the requirements for each one, just to give you a sense of if I see a spinal cord injury, what am I going to be using stimulation for? Um, and specifically, how am I going to use the stim for that particular thing? Edema control. Here you have trauma to the blood vessels and leakage of the blood cells and plasma proteins into the interstitial space. That's what acute edema is. So these components are negatively charged. So when they're exposed to a negative polarity, um, the idea is that they're going to be repelled from the area. So you get excess fluid shifted away from the area. So this is one of the proposed benefits of neuromuscular stimulation from for edema related conditions. So that's a polarity related issue or effect of NMES. Know the precautions, the contraindications. Go to your PowerPoint stuff that I printed out for you. Look at those. How to apply the electrode placement, these just practical motor points, things of that nature. This is all in your printout that I gave you guys for one. So, and what to use in terms of duration, frequency, ramp up time. Know that chart backwards and forwards. Know the exact parameters that you're going to use for different things, right? Well, how would the parameters for strengthening for an innervated muscle be different from an innervated muscle, right? In terms of pulse duration and frequency specifically. What are my parameters specific to muscle re-education, right? Versus functional electrical stim versus muscle right? Muscle spasm. So this is all on your chart. These are just everything that's on the PowerPoint here is reflected in your chart, I think much more comprehensively. So look at that chart as a primary study tool. Not a whole lot of good evidence that stim can decrease effusion or swelling, but they say that with the muscle pump, activating the contractile forces of the muscle can help to push um, fluid or push effusion or swelling through out of a particular area for reabsorption. So certainly contracting of the muscles can help to improve circulation to that muscle as well. So if you're looking for edema re-education, this is what they say you should do. Again, there's not a lot of evidence that shows that this is particularly effective, but that's something that they'll use. Again, here's denervated muscle. So knowing the guidelines and how each one of these changes, right? So duration is the longest that you possibly have if you have no direct current available. Remember, direct current is one that goes on and stays consistent until it goes off. So direct current is sometimes used with denervated muscles, but it's a little noxious, so sometimes we don't do that. We have portable versus clinical stimulators. That's important to know. And that's pretty much it for NMES. So big takeaways here are understanding, going back to the first PowerPoint and intro, looking at what are the specific parameters, right, or the characteristics of the wavelength, and how do I discern them from a definition standpoint. So what is the frequency? What is the duration? What is the ramp on time? What is the ramp off time? You have to know that in order to be able to figure out why we're using different combinations of these parameters to affect different treatment outcomes with respect, at least for this quiz, to NMES and in the future um, for other sensory oriented. So obviously NMES is oriented and centered around trying to create some kind of outcome within the motor nerves, right? The motor neurons. So we have specific parameters built just to reach the motor neuron specifically. And what we're trying to do by adjusting these parameters is elicit different types of responses by changing the pulse duration, by changing things like the pulse width, by changing um, things like the frequency or the amplitude. So all of those things are going to come into play. I want you to know not just, okay, these are the parameters that are listed on the chart. This is, I need to use 30 to 35 to 50 pulses per second, but understanding that that pulse rate, right, is going to be important in terms of trying to reach the motor neuron to get and elicit an action potential. So it's not just enough to know what parameters use. You need to take it to level 2 and understand why you're using those parameters. It's like, okay, I'm using this combination because I need to talk to the motor neuron versus the sensory or like A beta neuron, right? So I need to reach and speak to a specific neuron. That's why I'm using these particular parameters. and I'm tweaking the parameters to get different treatment outcomes, whether it be muscular reeducation for NMES or muscle strengthening, right? So understanding those differences, those little idiosyncratic differences between why you're using what you're using, right? And then level three is knowing now why I'm using these parameters. How am I going to apply this to a patient scenario? So I've got a patient here. First thing I got to do is figure out what are my contraindications, indications. What is this? Is e-stim even appropriate for this patient, first and foremost? Once I've made that determination, I can start to pick specific parameters that I want to use that are particular and identified based upon the findings of that patient, right? So, how is the patient presenting? Do they have like a foot drop? In that case, am I using a dorsiflexor strengthening? Is it going to be functional e-stim? Maybe I want to do muscular reeducation, but it all is going to depend on the symptom picture and the patient history and basically just the outlook of that patient as a whole that's going to help you make that determination to pick one modality in terms of electrical stim over another, or electrical stim with one set of parameters versus another. So you got to look at all phases. You have to know the basic information. You have to know why that information is important, pertinent to the physiology, in this case, the neurophysiology and muscular physiology. And then also in a case scenario, how do I take level one and level two, what I know about the definitions, what I know about their relationship to the physiology, combine those two things in a case scenario that's going to take me down the right, appropriate, safe treatment path for a particular patient. Okay, so these are the things you guys got to think about. Again, this is just a quick overview for your quiz. Hopefully this helps. Got a lot of material out there, so use it. Use the book, use the PowerPoint, use the previous lectures, use PhysioU. It's all there for you guys. So I hope this has been useful, and study hard this weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.